John Carter of Mars, a personal story. Hi, I'm Gary Lavisi, and this time we're going to look at the Martian series by Edgar Rice Burroughs in a little bit of a different way. First off, here's the 11 books published by Balentine Books beginning in 1963 of the Martian series, the Barsoom series, the John Carter series. These books I read when they first came out. I was 11 years old in 1963. So I was 11 or 12 years old when these books were out, and I remember seeing them in the store. And I had seen the Dell comic, which came out earlier, and I saw John Carter of Mars, and I said, wow, this looks like an interesting, fascinating series of otherworldly adventure, swords and planet adventure. Looked really cool, the heroic fantasy series. And I figured I wanted to read some of them. And most of the books were on sale, first few. And at that time, I was just a kid, so I was 11, 12 years old. I was making money cutting grass, cutting lawns in the neighborhood. And these people, first of all, where I grew up, people had big lawns. And when you cut the grass, the lawns, that was like a major job. It was like these lawns were endless, let me tell you. And but you know, I get paid $1 or $2 for cutting the lawn, and I go, oh wow, I'm rich. I'm 11 years old, so I could buy comic books and baseball cards and gum and bubble gum and all that stuff, which I was doing. So that was cool. For me to invest 50 cents in a paperback book, I knew it had to be good. It had to be something really, really good. So I saw these Balentine editions of Edgar Rice Burroughs' John Carter of Mars series. And I says, you know, I think I'm going to try one of them. I'm going to try them. But, you know, I looked at the titles, and the first book in the series, A Princess of Mars, do I really want to read a book about a princess? I mean, it might be okay, but, you know, I guess spend my 50 cents, you know, to read that. And then I got to read the whole book, you know, which was like, for me at that age, it's like, they're like 150, 60 pages. It's a lot of pages. It's a lot of words. So this is, you know, coming from, you know, thinking of a kid, 10, 11 years old. So the second book was The Gods of Mars, and I go, oh, I don't know, is that religious? I don't know if I want to read a religious book. As I didn't know what the you know, basis was. Third book was The Warlord of Mars. And I go, no, this sounds a little more interesting. It's like war, fighting, you know, all of that. That might be good. What's the next book? The next book was Thuvia, Maid of Mars. And I go, you know, I really want to read a book about a maid. I mean, you know, some people in the neighborhood, they had maids that came in and cleaned the house. And I says, they were very nice people, but I don't want to read a book about a maid. So that's what was going on in the muddled head of an 11-year-old. But anyway, I read them and I loved every one of them, even the maid one. And the maid one I'm going to show you is very interesting because there's a variant. So without further ado, I'm going to start off on this personal journey of John Carter of Mars, and I'm going to bring in some friends who are also at young ages were enamored and thrilled by Burroughs' John Carter of Mars. And those friends are the fantastic science fiction horror author, creator of The Keep, The Tomb, Repairman Jack, F. Paul Wilson. So we have a F. Paul Wilson tie-in today. We also have a John Norman tie-in. John Norman, who wrote the Gore books, was a big, big John Carter of Mars fan and Edgar Rice Burroughs fan. And Richard A. Lupoff, crime writer, fantasy science fiction author for many, many years, was also a big, big Edgar Rice Burroughs fan. In fact, he has some connection with the 11th book in this series. All of these fine gentlemen are people that I knew personally. We were friends. They were all at one time or another guests at my book show in New York City. I used to do the New York Pulp and Paperback show for 25 years. And they were all guests at the show. And we got to know each other, and we're good, fast friends. And they were all, like me, when they were younger, and continued when they, all throughout their life. Big fans of Edgar Rice Burroughs, big fans of John Carter of Mars books. So here we're going to look at the Balentine Editions. The first one, these are Bob Abbott paintings. It's from 1963. This is the first printing, first book in the series, The Princess of Mars. And the second book is The Gods of Mars. And book number 3 is The Warlord of Mars. Now, if Edgar Rice Burroughs would have stopped right there, like stop right there, and he would have not written any more Mars books, these books would have been valued and looked at as great classics over and above what they are today, because these books are incredible, and it's a trilogy that is all-encompassing among itself about the story of John Carter coming to Mars. But, of course, Burroughs wrote some other books in the series, which was great because that's what people wanted to read. Interesting thing is that the fourth book was Thuvia, Maid of Mars. Here's Thuvia with a giant bantha, or Martian lion. But interesting thing happened that a lot of people don't know about, is that the fourth book in the series, Thuvia, also had an alternate cover. So there was another later printing. This is the first printing. This is a later printing with a different variant cover art. And I don't know why that was, unless they were going to use it on another book, but it just appeared on that one printing of book number 4 in the Balentine series, Thuvia, Maid of Mars. Then you had, after the initial trilogy, you had Burroughs writing other characters on Mars. So this was the story of Thuvia. Chessmen of Mars was the story of Gannon of Gathol and John Carter and Digithoris's daughter. So that was Chessmen of Mars. The 6th book in the series was The Mastermind of Mars with Ras Thavis, who makes a comeback later on in the series. Book number 7, A Fighting Man of Mars. So this was something that when I saw this book when I was 11 years old, I said, Fighting Man of Mars. That sounds like pretty cool. And it's got some kind of spaceships in the cover. This was Ulysses Paxton. This was another American, and who somehow gets transported to Mars like John Carter did. And it's like his story on Mars. Now we go back to book number 8, Swords of Mars, and we're back with John Carter. He has another adventure where he's the primary protagonist, and he's fighting the Assassins Guild of Zodanga, a city that's an evil city that is trying to take over the planet, and he's fighting to subdue them and to end their reign of terror. And great story, great story. And the next one is number 9, Synthetic Men of Mars. Ras Thavis, the Mastermind of Mars, makes a comeback. He's thought to be dead, but he's escaped, and he's went to a lost city where he's creating humanoid, I guess you would call them kind of not android, but living protoplasmic humanoid creatures that he controls. Number 10 is Lana of Gathol. Great story. All these are great stories. And number 11, from 1965, the new Edgar Rice Burroughs, the John Carter of Mars book, John Carter of Mars. And this has an introduction by Richard A. Lupoff. So this is from 1965. He wrote the introduction for this book. He also did was the editor at Canaveral Press, which was publishing some of the Edgar Rice Burroughs books at that time in the 60s. So that's the part of the Lupoff connection with John Carter. The other connection is that Richard Lupoff wrote a terrific book, Edgar Rice Burroughs and the Martian Vision. And he wrote it originally for Mirage Press, and then in hardcover, and then I reprinted it years later as one of my Gryphon books, trade paperback with the George Barr cover. And this is just a terrific book about everything about Barsoom, about John Carter and Mars. And anybody who loves this series will love this book. It's just terrific. So that's the Lupoff connection. The F. Paul Wilson connection is that I had Paul as a guest at my show for many years, and he's just such a lovely gentleman, such a great guy. And one year he came by and he gave me a handful of Edgar Rice Burroughs books and some John Carter books. He says, "I know you like these, and I know you'll enjoy these." I says, "Oh, thank you." And the show was busy. It was like a crazy thing, and I didn't have time to look at them or anything. So I put them on the side, and when I got home, I looked at them because I had 25 guests at the show that day. It was like crazy. When I got home, I looked through them, and I noticed something very interesting about them. And so these are the 4 books: Thuvia Maid of Mars, Chessman of Mars, Mastermind of Mars, and Fighting Man of Mars, which I just showed you. But these are special editions. These are editions of a teenage F. Paul Wilson, when he was a teenager. And I looked at these books and I noticed something inside that seemed strange and unusual to me. And what it was they had the covers and the frontispiece from the Ace books glued into the pages of each of these books. So what he told me was he read the Ace books and he read them to death again and again, and they fell apart. But he loved the artwork so much that when he bought the Balentines, he glued them in. So he glued the covers in. So this is F. Paul Wilson as a teenager, probably like 14, 15 years old. Thuvia Maid of Mars. It has the frontispiece. Most of these were by Frank Frazetta or Roy Krenkel. And it has, on the title page, Thuvia Maid of Mars. The Ace book by Roy Krenkel. And this is from 1963, the first printing of this book. The Chessmen of Mars. Because Ace also reprinted these volumes. So the Chessmen of Mars, there you see the frontispiece from the Ace paperback. I believe that's Roy Krenkel. And the cover by Roy Krenkel, the Chessmen of Mars, the Ace edition. And these were cut out of the cover and the frontispiece to be glued into this edition. You can see how it was glued in. Originally with the Bob Abbott covers. The Mastermind of Mars. I think this is such a cool thing that he did. And as a teenager, You know, this is the kind of fan thing that teenagers do. Mastermind of Mars. There's Rastlavis. You said this says Ace St. Alan St. John. I don't know if St. John did that. Maybe. And here's the cover. And also another frontispiece. I think this was J. Allen St. John. And of course the cover of the Mastermind of Mars by Roy Krenkel. So these are the special editions. I think they're pretty cool and they've never been seen before. And it's a little interesting tie-in with famous writer F. Paul Wilson. Here's the Fighting Man of Mars. That's Roy G. Krenkel. And Roy Krenkel again for the cover art. So that's a nice, interesting set. These are mint books that he saved the Ace covers and put them on these books. The other thing is the other author was very friendly with was John Norman, who wrote the Gore books. And John Norman was a big Edgar Rice Burroughs fan and a John Carter of Mars fan. He was my guest for many years at my shows, and we would always get together and talk about Edgar Rice Burroughs, talk about John Carter of Mars. And his Gore series was his version of what he felt a more modern edition of John Carter would be like. So John Carter was written, the first book was in, I think, from 1912, and then John Norman was writing his books in the 1960s and 70s and 80s. And those Gore books were very popular. They went up to at least 24, if not more books, and very popular. And we used to talk a lot about all the things in the John Carter of Mars books and the Edgar Rice Burroughs that we both loved. And we had a lot of fun. And then when I decided to do my series of books based on John Carter, and I called the hero John Kirk. John Kirk, John for John Carter, and Kirk for Captain Kirk, because I liked Star Trek and I liked the adventure and the heroism of Captain Kirk. So I have ended up with 5 books in my John Kirk of Aries series. And it's the planet Aries, of course. It's not Mars, it's Aries, but Aries was Mars in the Greek mythology. And the books have nice blurbs by John Norman and also by Richard Lupoff. The first book is The Winged Men. The second book is The Invisible Men. These are all Marcus Boas covers. The third book is The Spacemen. Fourth book is The Mind Masters. And the fifth book is The Time Masters. And that's the series, John Kirk of Aries, which has been pretty well liked by people who've read them. And it takes in consideration like the kind of John Carter of Mars, my version of it. And so there's a little bit of a connection with me as a young fellow with Edgar Rice Burroughs and John Carter of Mars, and also with John Norman, Richard Lupoff, and F. Paul Wilson, who all of us, and like many others, love Barsoom, and sometimes in moments dream of being on Barsoom and being John Carter, and all the adventures that have to do with those great stories that have captured the imagination of people around the world for over 100 years. I hope you enjoyed this personal story, personal look at John Carter of Mars, books that I love. And if you do, give us a thumbs up and a like. Thank you for listening, and thanks for looking.